Okay. And here he is.
Thank you. Does the mic improve the quality, or is it whatever? Okay. We're here, I'm here to talk a little bit about Yiddish and about the Yiddish Club, and to answer any questions afterwards that you may have, and we're a small group, you can ask what you want whenever you want it, don't worry, and let's have fun. So what you see on the screen is actually the outline that I made for myself for this talk. So one has to start every talk with a joke, and so I was searching around for jokes, and I have a whole slew of them running around in my mind most of the time anyway, and question just in general, do I need to worry about being politically correct here? Okay, not too much, not too much. So, a young man from a secular Jewish family goes off to the university, in this case to Brandeis University, Jewish University, and on vacation he comes home and he's wearing a top hat and a long black coat, a capote, and an arba compass with the 4 little tassels, and he's got payos, and his mom opens the door and says, "Kikafim, Joe College." So that depends on the culture and the language. What the hell? This next one I heard at a party at my first cousin's home in Mexico City with his Yiddish-speaking friends. I will say it in Yiddish and then translate it. Ein junger Mann geht rein in ein Heisel und sieht, wie sein Tate kommt raus. Sagt Tate, was tust du? Und der Tate sagt, für $20 soll ich chappen die Mammen. Translated. A young man walks into a whorehouse, and as he's going in, he sees his father coming out. And he says, "Dad, what are you doing here?" And his father says, "For $20, I'm going to bother your mother?" So, but just to note, I could have, there are lots of them. Okay. We'll go through some others maybe later. Again, feel free to ask questions anytime, interrupt. We are a small group. Yiddish, there are many Jewish languages. So the second major Jewish language, which is less well known than Yiddish, is Ladino, but there's Judeo-Turkic, Judeo-Spanish, Judeo-Turkish, Judeo. There are many, many more. Hi. Yiddish developed in the Rhine Valley in more or less the end of the 10th, the 11th century, as far as people know. And there's not a lot of history, precise information at there are graves, and the first really written Yiddish appeared in a machzor, in a holiday prayer book, in 1272. Yiddish is said to have, there are various theories, but anyway, it developed along the Rhine near Cologne, Mainz, and it also is reputed to have developed in Bavaria and around Hesse. As I said, the first written Yiddish was in 1272. The Yiddish grew as a language very gradually and became more written. And it is written with the Hebrew alphabet, and when it was initially written, it looked more like Hebrew, that is. In Hebrew, the vowels are dots, dashes, slashes, nikudot. In Yiddish, every vowel is a letter, which is not the case in Hebrew. In the original writing, it was written as Yiddish with every vowel as a letter. However, there are also nekudot, and those have mostly disappeared, with exceptions. So it's not clear why exactly any language develops. There were Jewish merchants, and they wanted to have their own language. They wanted it to be private. I believe the Jews wanted to feel separate and remain separate, and so that, and definitely so that the Gentiles, the Goyim, would not understand. So Yiddish is its own language with its own grammar. Probably around 60, maybe 70% of the vocabulary is German, okay? Not always pronounced exactly the way it would be pronounced in German. About 30% is Hebrew. The Jews moved from the Rhine Valley. Well, they came up through Italy, but anyway, they moved through the Rhine Valley into Eastern Europe, and so there is a very strong Slavic influence, and that's in grammatical inflections and words and things like that. So for instance, for floor, sidewalk is trottoir. In Polish, it would be podloga. There are Russian words that were just taken in. Ozera is the word for lake, and some of the words were changed as they were taken in. Some of the words were taken in as they were. There is a Russian verb, hulyan, which means to cavort, and it was taken into Yiddish, and it was turned into a Germanic verb with Germanic endings, and so one would speak of hulyan, and there's a song, hulyat, hulyat, kinderlach, kavort, kavort, little children. There are also Romance languages influences. For instance, the Yiddish name Sprinze comes from Spanish originally, Esperanza. The Friday night meal kept in the oven overnight because you can't work on the Sabbath and then taken out. Cholent is probably comes from Cholent, long heat, which is French, and so there's Polish, Russian. That's the strongest influence, but there is also French. There's clearly a lot of German. The grammar is similar to that of German, but also has Romance language influences and, as I said, Slavic influences. But by the way, given that we're a small group, I'm just talking and expatiating, which if you'll permit me, that's okay, but if you want me to shorten things, that's fine. Yiddish developed gradually, and it developed as a language of the vernacular, everyday language. It was also called women's language because women were not as highly educated religiously and often couldn't read Hebrew or couldn't speak it. It was at one point it was called Weiberteitsch, which means wife's or woman's translation, and it incorporated other forms of literature as it grew. So there were romance novels in Yiddish. The prayers were translated into a Yiddish prayer book called the Tzena Urena. Epic tales, one called the Bovo book, was originally an Italian chivalric romance. And there was more and more writing as it developed. Then there was a really large flowering of literature and more use of Yiddish between the late 19th century and the 20th century. And that was truly a flowering. It ran probably from 1880 to World War II. Yud Lamed Peretz, the early writers were Yud Lamed Peretz, Mendele Mochosforim, Shalom Aleichem, and then Yiddish moved to the United States both before the war and after the war, and there was not so much Yiddish novels as poetry written here. The poets were known as Insichisten or introspectivists, and some of the poetry is wonderful. The song I was thinking of playing on YouTube here is based on a poem by a really fabulous poet named Itzik Monger, and it turns into a very good, playful song. In between the wars, there were groups of Yiddish writers in Moscow, in Warsaw, and in Vilna, and the literature flowered and the language grew. Let me just stop briefly. I've been going on. Does anybody have any questions on any of what I've covered or anything else? And believe me, just interrupt. It's, yes, Rich.
Thank you for all this background. I thought that Yiddish grew up in Brooklyn amongst grandmothers, so this is very enlightening. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. So, yeah, Betsy.
So I always thought that Yiddish always had that little back, that little sense of humor and the wryness. But when you're talking history, do we have any way to know how it was used during down the centuries, other than the artifacts that are left? I mean, where did the Jewish sense of humor come from? Yiddish or Kof?
Could you repeat the question for the recording?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Betsy asked, are there any artifacts that reflect, let's say, the Jewish sense of irony or humor or self-deprecation or whatever one may want? I'm trying to think if the Yiddish Book Center has old newspapers, and in the newspapers published here and also in Europe, there was definitely a lot of comedy. So there are artifacts. It's just that the recorded artifacts are in the newspapers and journals. Yes, so and if you go back to them, yes, there are. The jokes tend to be a little different, but there are.
I just love to think about 10th century jokes.
Yeah, that would be, that's a, yeah, we could make them up after at some point. Did you catch that, Mervyn? Okay, thank you. World War II decimated the Yiddish-speaking population. It's estimated that before World War II, there were probably 16 million Jews in the world, mostly in Europe. Of those 16 million, probably around 13 million, excuse me, were Yiddish speakers. World War II lost 6 million Jews, and that's a large loss. After the war, poetry continued in the United States, and Isaac Bashevis Singer wrote in the United States. He wrote originally in Yiddish and translated it into English, and sometimes later in his career wrote it directly in English. As you know, he won the Nobel Prize, so that's a prize for Yiddish in some sense. And there are many American Jewish writers who don't write in Yiddish per se, but there is a large influence, Saul Bellow, Philip Roth, others as well, Mordechai Rickler, and many others. And Yiddish words creep into their novels, and Yiddish words have crept into English. By the way, many Yiddish words were also taken into German, especially the Hebrew words, and they tended to migrate more often into criminal slang and into hobo or traveler's slang, Rotdeutsch, and so there are a lot of influences. Yes, please, Walt.
What is the attitude of Israel toward? What is the attitude of Israel toward Yiddish?
That's a very good question. Thank you. Immediately after the war, European Jews who did not become Israelis or pioneers or chalutzim were looked down upon, and Yiddish was looked down upon. It could have been a bilingual state had that not been the case. So you're hearing somebody who has a bit of a bias. I mean, I like Israel, I've been there and all that stuff, but it's like a loss of 1,000 years of history for the majority of the Jewish population. More recently, there has been, as I'll get to, sort of a Yiddish renaissance. And that doesn't mean it's becoming a daily language for lots of people. But the internet has really done a lot. I mean, I can crawl into European Yiddish libraries, or you can go to the Yiddish Book Center and pull up almost any published Yiddish book. And so there is Young Yiddish, which is a group in Jerusalem, no, I think Tel Aviv, and there's Das Art. So there are groups in Israel. And the Hasidim in Bnei Brak, Mirash, all the Hasidic neighborhoods and speak Yiddish. They speak what would be, and the same thing is true in Brownsville and Williamsburg and Brooklyn. They speak a somewhat Polish Yiddish, and I don't know the Yiddish that is spoken in Israel, but in Williamsburg, Crown Heights, etc., a lot of English words are tossed in, and it is a Polish Yiddish which has some unique pronouns and endings, and it's not necessarily as tightly grammatical according to the standardized grammar. There are also Yiddishists whose families speak primarily Yiddish at home. Let's say 6 weeks ago, I spent a week in Zygjanek, which is a small town in Poland, about 20 miles west of Warsaw, and this was a Yiddish marathon. This was a week of speaking Yiddish with workshops and stuff, arranged by the Medem Bibliothek, which is the major Yiddish center. But there are now Yiddish summer schools in Brussels, in Warsaw, in Tel Aviv, in Weimar. So there's sort of a renaissance, but yes, please.
I'm going to interrupt at this moment. Do you
No.
know if those summer schools are intended for beginners, or are they for...
The summer schools have courses at all levels. The Yiddish Book Center has beginners courses, definitely, and Yiva has Yiddish courses. The greatest number, and to my mind, really very fine Yiddish courses are given by the Workers' Circle, and you can enroll in courses at any level there, from beginners to teachers' seminars. And the same thing is true in Medem Bibliothek, but the speaking language is French, so, well, yeah, it's in French. Most of the people know Yiddish there, but I mean, know English. And, but so there are courses there as well. But if I were recommending a beginner's course, I would say the Yiddish Book Center or the Workers' Circle. Those are So there was an attempt to standardize, well, it's not an attempt. Yiddish was standardized in the early 20th century by linguists and intellectuals and philologists in Europe. And they wrote articles that appeared in journals, and they tried to get consensus among the Yiddish-speaking population. And so now there is, quote, a received Yiddish, or like the Académie Française, not exactly, but that's called Klal Yiddish, and Klal is the Hebrew word for rule, which is to say rule-based Yiddish, but there are a wide variety of dialects, and so there is still great variability, but what is usually taught is Klal Yiddish, which is closest in sound, speech, to a Lithuanian Yiddish dialect, a Litvak, as opposed to a Polish, Ukrainian, Russian Yiddish dialect. Yes, please.
It seems like Yiddish has a lot of words. Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Thanks. Seems like Yiddish has a lot of words that can't be translated directly, which is true for all languages, but do you think Yiddish has more than the average language of words that can't be translated one-to-one?
So I would like to say yes, but I don't think so, actually, because I've had tries at translating Yiddish words, and let me say it's more, so I can say in English, let's have fun. I can say in Yiddish, lass mir haben Hanoi, or lass mir zusammen vergnügen. But those say satisfaction and enjoyment, and there is not the same carefree sense of, doesn't make a damn bit of difference as there is in English. So it's very hard to translate. The level of diction in Yiddish, on the average, the Yiddish vernacular is slightly more polite. It's called Edelkeit. But, I mean, it's just slightly more polite than English. So, example. My brother and I would occasionally ask my mother, wow, we have nothing to do. What should we do? And she would say, she was an immigrant, and we spoke English and Yiddish. Nimm de hand und stuppe Tuches rein. And so my brother would say, Mom, say it in English. And he would say, I would never do that, because she had just said, take your hands and shove them up your ass. And so, but at the level of diction was such that it was just sort of a gentle, you know, affectionate pat on the head, really. So, I mean, you can curse seriously in Yiddish, but even the worst curse by my father didn't come out as harsh, even though, if I say it to you, he was very angry at me once, and he said, denkst du, als du hast die Hände reingestopft? Thank you. Denkst du, als du hast die Hände reingestopft in Tuches und sich abgekindelt, which means, do you think that you shoved your hands up your ass and gave birth to yourself? But when he said it and he was damned angry, it was not, when he really was angry, he'd speak English. I wanted to write a letter to my, I wanted to write a letter to my favorite aunt, who spoke Yiddish and English and was an immigrant. She would write me birthday cards in Yiddish, Happy Birthday, but in Yiddish words. When my uncle died, I wanted to write a letter to her. I was 11 at the time. And I wrote letter after letter in English, and it just didn't work, because I wanted to describe him as an independent, self-made man. And then I wrote it in Yiddish using the word selbstständig, which is independent and stand by yourself and has other connotations than, and I was writing Yiddish as well, and somehow it worked. So, but that's also true of French. I mean, there are many words in French that don't translate easily, je me débrouille or stuff like that. Yes, please.
When you talked about what your mom or father, those sayings, I remember reading a book called Kvetch, and it was
Wexler. Yeah.
and it was full of those sort of, they were kind of like insults, but there was a purpose behind them, and I couldn't really totally understand, like a way of keeping the evil eye away from you, or a sort of sense of what that irony or joking was about. And I don't know if you can speak to that, because they were, you know, when I was reading them, I was like, God, you know, how many of these do we need? But
they're, well, first comment, I don't like the title of that book because it casts Yiddish in a particular light, kvetch, complaint.
yeah.
However, there are a lot of Yiddish sprichwörtlich, sayings, proverbs, and the like. And they have, let's say for me, I'm also familiar with English, they have a different flavor. So if I say, a schwarze cholera soll ihn nehmen, may he be beset by a black cholera. I can give you a worse one, which doesn't come across as bad as it is. Soll ihm nur stinken von dem Kopf. May he only have gangrene of the head. But there are playful ones. Sollst wachsen wie a Zibbele mit dem Koppendreher. May you grow like an onion with your head in the ground. And there are many, 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 many more. And there are good books loaded with them.
But do you have a sense of, you know, how the, because a lot of them felt like they were, you know, they were pretty harsh, and
But
jump in the river.
Yes,
they were very harsh, and I don't know if.
But there are also zoals wachsen wie a Zibbele in Koppendreher, or what's he doing now of a man who's dead? Liegt in de ruil bakt bagel. He's lying in the ground and baking bagels. There are all sorts of them.
Hundreds of them in that book.
If you read, I haven't read Kvetch, so I don't know, but the attitude that the title suggests is a certain complaining harshness, and I just don't find that in the language. But you can find all sorts of, you can find, it's like the Bible, you can find proverbs, sayings that will lean in any direction that you want, but in vernacular speech, there's a higher average level of sort of politeness. The level of diction is a...
Well, you might take a look at it, because I didn't find it very polite, but I mean,
Oh.
I was shocked, actually.
Yeah, no,
But
I
anyway, you might
understand. I
look at it.
mean, I can...
I was wondering about the psychology of like what that was. On some level, it said something about better to like a thing to keep away the evil eye. You know, you should-
horror. May the evil eye not strike you. Yeah.
Yeah, as if we insult you, we won't
Well,
praise you, because to
I
praise you
think-
might bring the evil eye to you. So we'll insult you. But that
It
sort of
depends
sounded
on
like.
your heritage, I think. I mean, if you grew up in the States and your family was trying to assimilate and escape the language, things were harsh, and you heard things like no chuppah, no shtuppah, which means no canopy, you don't screw. So it depends on the attitude of the family, the linguist. There are sayings that are sort of very, very mild. Let's see. There's an older book called Words Like Arrows, but at this point it's probably antiquarian. Shirley, I don't remember her second name. It's a very good question, and I sympathize, but for me, it says more about the background of the people than it does say about the language, but for me.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, please.
Are you saying, or was your experience that many things were meant more affectionately than the...
Definitely.
That there was connotation? So the thought that there was connotation and attitude that tended to accompany...
Yeah,
and
not
not necessarily harsh.
not necessarily harsh, and there was a lot of use of diminutives, yingala, maidla, that is, and diminutives were not always, but very, very frequently affectionate diminutives. And so you could say something harsh, the sounding, with Chepamir nicht yingala, don't bother me, little boy. And little boy is by just what you're saying, affectionate, just by the ending, so to speak, affectionate. Yes?
So what was happening in the early 13th century to cause this language to evolve?
Please speak into the microphone.
Oh, what was happening in the early 13th century to cause the evolution of Yiddish? And was there a need for secrecy in that part of the world?
Let's
Jews?
say, in the merchant class, there was a need for secrecy. Then it was also useful to have Yiddish when you were getting in trouble. If I wanted to say to you, don't speak, that is, you're a little boy and you're caught by the police, and this is actually an example from Shalom Aleichem, I could say, red nicht. But he wrote diber nicht. Diber is speaking from Hebrew. It was taken into Yiddish as a verb in that sense, and then the people around didn't know, and the policeman didn't know that he was telling the little boy not to speak. Similarly, if someone was caught, and the best thing for, let's say, a youngster to do would be to run away, you could say mach trep, which means make steps, so to speak. But it would be more likely to say mach pleta, which is steps in Hebrew. And so, but I think there were truly a variety of forces. That is, it was developed by women. It was a patriarchy, and men wanted to have women to have some knowledge, but not everything, so they translated things into Yiddish. When you went to Cheder, that is school in Europe, you read the Tanakh, the first 5 books of the Bible. You read them literally in Hebrew, but when you translated them into Yiddish. And there was also a Yiddish translation that you could read. So there were lots and lots of forces as to why. I don't know. I mean, I think it's the same question could be asked of French or English. How did we move from Old English, Middle English, to to modern English, but I suspect need for separateness, the need for secrecy, everyday language, a need for language, in this case, for women or young children, and so I think there were lots of forces. But I'm speculating. I mean, I know how it developed, but I don't know all the whys, certainly. And most of the study of Yiddish was not psycholinguistic in that sense, it was more philological. Unfortunately, there aren't any etymological dictionaries that I know of, but it was more philological. Yes, please, Walt.
Yiddish, like any language, has the purpose of conveying meaning
Yes.
and carrying out daily activities. But I have an impression that there's an attitude in Yiddish, that it has an attitude. Is that accurate? Or if it does have an attitude, in addition to just conveying meaning, is it something that came from the history of the people, the hardship of the people? Because there's a lot of humor in it, resigned humor and that sort of thing. So does the language fit the experience of the Jewish people in a way that gives it a unique attitude?
I would say it's my feeling that in general, yes. However, I feel the same way about French, and I feel the same way about English, and I feel very much the same way about German. So let's say you wanted to know, the German word for backfire is Aufpuff, Aufpuff, puff out.
Yeah.
And you can create words in German. Anyway, the point being, I believe that every language has its own sort of average level of diction and attitude, and so it's...
Is Yiddish especially useful for developing a sarcastic attitude toward life?
Let's say, it seems to me, yes, but I'm very, very biased, as you can understand. I'm very biased. Let's see, I'll give you an example. On there it says Zwingenberg. Zwingenberg is a little town in Germany about 25 miles south of Frankfurt. We had some good German friends who lived there. And we met them in Gold Beach, actually, and then we went through Germany with them. So Bruno and I would go to his Stammtisch, root table, regulars table, in the pub. This was a German pub. I'd sit in this group of guys, and I understood everything that they were saying because I knew the context, and German was similar enough to Yiddish that I just understood. But I didn't want to insult them, so I didn't say anything. I didn't know. Okay. We were walking home, which is to say, me to Dana's in my room and him to his apartment, and I say, Bruno, do you think that I understand everything? You think I could speak Yiddish? He says, of course. They'll think you're speaking a Hessian dialect. So from there on, I spoke Yiddish. I Germanized it. You know, you can do that in some ways. I got along with everyone. They got along with me. Someone actually gave me a Hessian dialect sort of little dictionary of words, and there was one guy, Horst, who never spoke to anyone, but in the men's room he'd speak with me. So, you know, yeah. So I think that gets at your question, but it doesn't answer it per se. Let's see. Let me scroll up a bit here. Sorry. Okay. The major linguist of Yiddish was a man named Max Weinreich, and he spoke of internal bilingualism, which is to say the relationship between Hebrew and German coming together in its unique way in Yiddish. And he also mentioned the Slavic influence. So I think probably all languages have a certain internal bilingualism, but the question is how dominant is the culture, how large is the population. In the Jews' case, in the case of Yiddish, I think this is an apt description, So are there, I have listed words here just because I listed words. I thought you might be interested in them, but we can certainly discuss other words. I have up here the comprehensive English-Yiddish dictionary that is gathered by the daughter of a well-known Yiddish linguist, and she belongs to the League for Yiddish, which is trying to create Yiddish as an everyday language. Let's go with these words, and you can then go which way you want. Haben Hanoah. Haben is a Germanic verb, to have. Hanoah is Hebrew, and it means to have fun. It's as close as you can get in Yiddish to having fun. It doesn't, there's an emotional depth of enjoyment that doesn't correspond to the English carefree. It's just different. A Vergnügen is a satisfaction, but I say satisfaction. I could have satisfaction with almost zero emotion. Vergnügen just has more feeling in it as a word, and it could also mean enjoyment. Schmeichel, I just wanted to tell you, it's smile, and it's from the Germanic, and if you listen carefully, you can hear that it is actually a cognate, smile, schmeichel. Anyway.
You skipped Hamish.
Sorry?
You skipped Hamish.
Oh, Hamish means like home, and it means warm and home.
Okay.
Like home. Thank you. Appreciate it. Chaver is Hebrew for friend. It means friend in Yiddish. You can also say Freund, which is the German word. Spilkes. Spilkes is originally Slavic. It means safety pins. And when you speak of someone as hat Spilkes, which means he's restless, he can't stop moving. And if you wanted to color it a little more, hat Spilkes in Tochus, that is, he has safety pins, you know. Kvel, to take pleasure in your child's or someone else's accomplishment. Nachas, the pleasure that you take, which is Hebrew. Kvel is Germanic. Verlunget, which is a word that probably have all heard. It means literally lost, but it's used. And so in Yiddish, verblunget can have an emotional connotation, but more nearly it means lost in the literal sense. And when we use it, as it's crept into English, it has a more of an emotional connotation. So are there other words you'd like to know? And I don't know them all by any stretch, but I have references to them. Yes, please.
So thank you for doing this. My father was born in Lithuania and came here
Okay.
when he was 10. So, and all my grandparents were not born here and spoke Yiddish. And one of the things that we would do in my family that was always fun, we would ask my parents to try to distinguish between these different Yiddish words. Like, what's the difference between fardrate and farmisht, or sidrate and samisht, or
good, excellent.
shlemiel and shlemazel. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
maybe you could speak to some of those, because there were so many nuances of the words, and sometimes
Yeah.
they couldn't even exactly
Yeah.
explain what the difference was, but we'd all be hysterical as they tried
So,
to do that.
Verdraht and Semisht, let's say, just taking those two. They, as taken in, and as used in Yiddish as well as in English, they mean mixed up in general. You don't know what's going on. Verdraht literally means twisted around, and Semisht means literally mixed up, as when you're cooking or something like that. So they have different flavors of being confused and lost, but as you, the literal translation colors them. Give me another pair, or if you want.
Then there was the shlemiel, shlemazel, shmendrik, that whole, that whole
Okay,
range.
well, yeah, those are, yes. Shlemazel is somebody who's crude and doesn't know what's going on. Shlemiel is a stronger version of that. Shmendrik is primarily an unknowing ne'er-do-well. Yes. Wait, there was another question first. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to be a know-it-all, even though I know nothing. But it sounds to me like, we have synonyms in English. Most languages
Yes.
have synonyms. So we
right.
don't have to have just one way to say something, right? And I would also think, although this is the part I don't really know, that we have regional dialects.
Mhm.
So maybe it's a Schlemiel in Poland, but it's a Schmendrick in Germany. I don't know.
Yeah.
When my
the-
parents would talk about it, they would just, they would make some of those more subtle distinctions,
Yeah.
though. So
Well,
that's what they would do.
let me say, English is indeed a very rich language, and if you talk in terms of literal vocabulary size, English and Russian have the greatest number of spoken words in the world, as presently estimated. Yes, and we do have a lot of subtleties. The subtleties, the flavor of the subtleties is on average, to my way of thinking, different.
And again, I'm just thinking from what you just said. I mean, the reason that English is now so big is because other languages are becoming extinct, and we're pulling more and more people of the world into our language.
Well, English is now the lingua franca of the world.
Right. So maybe also the same thing as people, as Jews emigrated.
Yeah. Well,
maybe
Yiddish was
changes.
Yiddish. The new exhibition at the Yiddish Book Center is now called Yiddish, a Global Culture. And it was, and it is now, but the density of speakers is different from what it was. English is what you use when you use Microsoft and computers, and so everyone wants to know English. I've been in many parts of cities, lands in Europe, and when we were in France, I insisted, and didn't insist harshly, that we speak French when I was talking with someone, and the person would usually want to speak English. So as we were leaving France, we were at Charles de Gaulle, and I left my wife with the luggage in a line that I thought she needed to be, and I said, I'll go check. And I went to check with a young woman, 40-ish, and we're talking. What we ended up, and we weren't in the correct line, what we ended up talking about was whether or not we should speak English or French. And I mean, she wanted to speak English, and I wanted to speak French. Okay, yes, please.
Yeah, I was just going to say a word for schmagegi should be included in the previous group.
And yes, schmagegi, shemiel, shmendrik, shlemazel, and the connotations would be described differently if you were talking to a Lithuanian as opposed to a Polish Jew. I mean, but yeah, people made distinctions, yes.
What do you think is the reason that Yiddish has survived from the 13th century till now? What are some of the perhaps emotional reasons, or what do you think is happening?
Okay, so this is opinion, not necessarily truth.
Absolutely.
I think Yiddish survived as it did because it remains global. So there are Jews who speak Yiddish all over the place. I do think that one of the other reasons is the strong emphasis within Jewish culture on literacy and on books and on learning. And I think that was, to my way of thinking, was a strong force for its survival. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Yeah, I get it. Yeah, press the yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. I wanted to ask about onomatopoeia. I wanted to ask about words like, I'm thinking of my grandmother used to talk about something would make her brat.
Yeah.
Which sounds like throwing up. It sounds like throwing up to me, and that's what the word is.
Yeah.
Or like
it is.
pachka, plots, things like that. It sounds like what it is.
Yeah, that is, to people who grow up with the words, they're onomatopoetic. Brech means vomit, but it also means to break. Pachka means to fiddle around. And so brech is German, pachka is Russian. When you come across something with a k ending, ke, it's probably Slavic. No, it could. It's German with a Russian ending, huh? Pach is German and k is Slavic. Anyway, so yeah, what was the third one you mentioned?
I can't. Brech, pachka, and plots.
Oh, yeah, plots. Plots means so. It means literally. It's from the German and means literally to burst, but it's used now emotionally, and you can also use it for just falling down. So yeah.
Or schwitz. One more. I think that also matches how it feels. I'm schwitzing.
Well,
Yeah.
if you've used it as you have in your family, it matches the sound. Yeah.
What I thought about when the question was, why has it survived, or sort of talking about the renaissance of Yiddish, for me, it feels like there's this kind of reaction to a sense of assimilation, and certainly what's happening in the world or sort of today, that as myself being a secular Jew or humanist Jew, I didn't really identify with Hebrew necessarily or traditional, the language of the religious Jews, but very much culturally and literally, with our history and culture and growing up in New York, and we talked a little bit about the Bundist movement and so on, and that movement in Europe where people wanted to sort of have a sense of the culture by speaking Yiddish, that there's for me this feeling of not wanting to revive that, wanting to sort of pull that back out of the ashes, and recognizing my own assimilation, and I think it's happening in many other different cultures too, Native American cultures, so on, where we forgot. And so I'm wondering if you feel that way in terms of the Renaissance that's happening.
I do feel that, let's say, I spoke Yiddish and English mixed up as a little kid. I was educated in Yiddish through a high school level, but I didn't take it seriously. My parents continued to speak Yiddish, but it was more literary and political language, and for everyday stuff, they spoke English. I do think, so I maybe longer ago, almost 40 years ago, and I'm beyond that, I went back to Yiddish, and my own motivation was that I felt I owed a debt to my parents, and I owed a debt to the culture. That wasn't the only, I really like the language, I love the language, but in the background there were those things. But yes, there are people who want to draw it back and make it alive, and the internet and Zoom have done remarkable things. You can get almost one of the 40,000 books that were published in Yiddish between the late 19th and in the 20th century are digitized by the Yiddish Book Center. And if you want to look at them, you can go, it's free. You can go do it.
Yeah, and growing up speaking Yiddish, and same thing, and many of my peers spoke Yiddish, and I stopped speaking it, and now they're sort of getting together as a group from Camp Hemshech and Gadiela, and having a Sunday thing, and everybody's speaking Yiddish, and they're very fluent, and I just, listen. But are there those sort of things here in Portland, like conversation groups here? I know
there are lots of conversation groups. Let me also mention that there's a new term that was developed called, and there's a book about it, called post-vernacular Yiddish, which is to say, you can be someone who wants to use some Yiddish words in English. You can be someone who would like to go farther than that and maybe know some proverbs or sprinkled phrases in. You may want to go deeper and actually study it, but in translation. So there are lots and lots of levels, and this is described, or has been recently described, as post-vernacular Yiddish, and you could ask yourself, where do I fit in that? So I am also post-vernacular in that I don't speak Yiddish in everyday conversation, but I enjoy, when I have a chance, going to a summer school or something and being able to fall into it. So, yeah.
And,
Can you say a word about your own monthly group then?
Oh, thank you, yes. So, Kol Shalom, Community for Humanistic Judaism, has been supporting my efforts for 10 years. I began to lead their Yiddish group, the Kol Shalom Yiddish group, when the teacher aged out. She became old. Yeah, someone died. So let me tell you what the structure of a typical meeting would be. So I don't lecture there, so, okay. Typically, I pick 2 songs, and I have them in, well, I have them in all forms, but I typically send them out in transliteration and in Yiddish. Transliteration is very helpful because you can get a feel for the flow of the language, and the translation, you need to know what's being said. So but first, we listen to the song performed on YouTube. Then we talk about the words and the literal meanings and the etymologies and the social context, and then typically we listen to another performance or 2, so you get the flavor of different presentations of the songs. Then afterwards, I pick a poem, and we do the same thing with the poem, which is I have it in transliteration. You originally get it in Yiddish, transliteration, and English, translation, and we go through it and we talk about the words and the context and where it comes from as a poem. Then there's a group of vocabulary words. The League for Yiddish, which is listed here, publishes online every week Wörter von der Woche, words of the week. And I pick one of the topics. So I think the last one was injunctions and court judgments and stuff. That was one of their topics. And we go about that, and we do the same sort of analysis with me, sort of making comments on where does it come from, and the Hebrew, the German, if there was some Slavic flavor to it. And then so, yeah, and it's online. It's on Zoom. You will all, because you received announcements for this event, you will all receive announcements for, if I have your email, you'll all receive announcements. For the class, the next one will be November 12th, Sunday, November 12th. It will be 11 a.m. I also list 2 p.m. because some people from East Coast, and I list Paris and Berlin time because I have a couple of friends there who may join in. Are there other questions? It meets once a month, and the goal is to explore Yiddish and Yiddishkeit and have a little fun, and if you learn something along the way, so much the better. And if people ask questions, well, how would you say X or Y in Yiddish? We'll talk about that too. So, thank you, Walt.
Are there any last questions? Because we
want
to leave time for socializing or whatever else you have.
Okay, so how constrained am I with time? Because I have a song here that...
Play your song.
Okay, so this is a song. It comes from a poem by a poet named Itzik Monger, and let me show you the translation, just so you know what's going to be sung. Then you're going to hear it sung by a Russian band and ensemble, and you'll understand. Marvin, the transliteration and all the rest of that. I asked Eric, and he said the time is not.
No, okay.
Okay. Oh, yeah, thank you. Okay, so So this, a poem written by Itzik Monger. He's a really lovely poet, and he's written some very serious poetry. But when he writes poetry that is then music written for it, it's really playful, but it's deeper than you might at first understand. So this is The Little Gypsy, das Klayner Tsigaynerl. Were we in a class, I would talk about all these words here, but we can, or you can ask, or whatever. I am a little gypsy, a small one. And in Tsigaynerl, little gypsy is affectionate in Yiddish. Tzigayner is, Tzigano is Yiddish, is gypsy in lots of European languages. A Klayner, a small one, that's again meant to be affectionate. But as you see, a handsome one, and the Yiddish is pretty, but that means handsome. Barefoot, hungry, and happy. So poor, but happy. I live... Yeah, okay. I live as if I were a prince. I don't know where I was born. He just doesn't know. So he is an orphan, but what the hell. My mother lost me in the steppe. That steppe is the Russian or Ukrainian or Siberian steppe. My father was hanged when he went out thieving. Let me... And this is the refrain, "Oh, you fiddle, little fiddle of mine, play my sadness into their hearts. Oh, you friend of mine, who knows, as only you do, that forever, forever red are blood and wine." And just as a background factor, the poet liked alcohol. And I won't say it, you can read it here if you want, and I'll scroll it up. And then we'll play it in Yiddish, and you'll see that it's different in its way from what you read. May I move to the next stanza? Yeah, okay. Sorry. Excuse me.
You're trying to get to the third stanza?
Yeah, there's that. Okay, and one more stanza. Yeah, so this third stanza, a song of pursuit and hurrying, that is the life of poor people, and gypsies. Thank you. Play my sadness. Okay, and then here. I sing as does no one else. Whatever song would please you, you can choose for me to play. You only have to pay me 3 rubles. Doesn't cost you very much, and so, and if you wish, you could read the song, and there's more that it says than what you're reading, but it's sort of playful. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, let's play. So this is a Russian band, a Russian female singer singing the song. And when Russians do Yiddish, it's schmaltzy. So, but I don't think I take away from the performance saying that.
Tsigaynerl a Klayner, aber wir sind a Scheiner. Boris, wunderig und freile, leb ich mir wie a Benemeile. Ich weiß nicht, wo ich bin geboren, mein Mama ist mich in Stepp verloren. Mein Tat hat mir neu gefangen, wenn ist gegangen, wenn gegangen. Du Fiedel, Fiedel, du mein, spiel mein Treuer zu sehen, Herz herein. Du aber mein, aber weißt wie du allein, hast ewig betreutes Blut von Wein. Mein Taten, die erste hab ich die Fiedel, spiele euch ihr Didel, Didel, Didel. In mein Fiedel kennt Herren, mein Mann ist Zar, mein Schwester Streben. In mein Fiedel liegt gefangen, wem hat mein Tat neu gehangen. Wem zum Tod hat ihn getrieben, ist die Fiedel an ihr a Klayner, sind wie sie nicht keiner. Was für ein Lied zu sein bestellen, wer es mir bei mir bestellen. Was soll der Verbräuß der Reihe, es kostet meine wenig. Ich kann nicht, ist Blut von Wein.
If I may, let me just make one comment here. That is, one comment. This is a playful and affectionate song singing very happily, entirely of hardship and pain. And I like it. Itzig Monger he's fine. So why don't we break up? I'll be around, have some cookies. They're really very good. I can attest to that. And if you have any questions, come on up. Happy to try and answer. And if you want to look at the dictionaries or other books, please feel free.
And I would just like to thank Benson.
You're welcome.